Well, I was fortunate to meet and interview Arthur Marshall in 1959, November '59, and those days, way before handheld cassettes, you know, you had to take an open reel recorder. That's what I took on the train, a big Ampex, open reel, open tape, or analog tape, and a microphone and lug all that stuff. But I knew it was, I had to get some of Marshall's talking and some of his playing. He wasn't doing much playing because he'd had a stroke, and his left hand could go about 16 measures and then it would get out of control. But I managed to meet him and talk with him in November, and I managed to play for him 2 of the hand-played Scott Joplin piano rolls that I had, and to get his comments on them. And through what comments he made on the rolls, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of Scott Joplin style on those rolls. There's some controversy about piano rolls, of the Joplin rolls, because Joplin was pretty sick in 1916 when those rolls were issued. And they were probably cut around that time too. But some collectors think that they just used Joplin's name, and he didn't even play them. But I don't think that's true. No. And I pointed out, I asked Marshall about some of the embellishments in the left hand and so forth, and he said, well, you got the right rolls, all right. Arthur Marshall was a very, very gracious, very quiet, gentlemanly type. I guess he was in his 70s by this time when I met him. And he was a little nervous being interviewed. He hadn't been interviewed, I guess, in a long, long time. But like I say, I only met him the one time. And his daughter Mildred was taking care of him and looking out after him. He was just living quietly in Kansas City, and I located him by accessing a Kansas City directory, and I wrote all the Arthur Marshalls. There were like 6 of them in the Kansas City directory, and I wrote them all the same letter. Are you the Arthur Marshall? And he sent me a little tiny piece of paper back, which I still have. He says, I am undoubtedly the Arthur Marshall you are seeking, but I must know your full intentions about my music. So anyway, I located him, and I called him and tried to arrange an interview, but he wasn't feeling well. So I never did get to see him until they were going to have this celebration in Sedalia, and I said to Bob Darch, I said, why don't you get Arthur Marshall as the guest of honor? And that's what he did. And they brought in Arthur Marshall, and that's how we met him. And he did play a little bit. That does survive. I did manage to tape a little bit of his playing.
Okay.
Yeah. Chauf Williams showed up at the concert that night. He had sent a note up to Darch on stage that he had known Scott Joplin and played Ragtime. And I was backstage. I was around, watching the tape recorder and make sure it was working and everything. And Chauf Williams came up, and he starts, sits down on the piano, and he starts talking about how he used to entertain the girls in the bordellos. Mm-hmm. And there was somebody in the back who got very worried and put their hand on the curtain pole like they were going to stop the show. And I saw Darch saw that, and Darch he just broke out in a sweat immediately. He's sweating. But nothing happened. But the important thing that did happen was that Chauf Williams played some piano, and he played this wonderful rag of his own called Williams's Rag, he called it. And he talked a little bit about knowing some of the early players and so forth. Then when we got back to St. Louis, I looked him up, and he had a little music studio down on Garrison Street. So I looked him up. And he had a very famous son, the jazz drummer, Chauncey Williams. Yeah. Yeah, that was quite an evening. And I got all that on tape, too. Yeah.